feels so good to be back with friends, colleagues, no family, but with so many people that I respect and have worked with over the years. And this is the first year that I get a chance to co-present with Chase Obenchain. So welcome, Chase, to co-presenting. It's exciting to be here.
Thank you. Yes, very similarly, as Robert was saying, I just want to echo that exact same sentiment. This is my first time at the RCA conference. I see a lot of familiar faces, many more unfamiliar faces, but very excited to get to meet all of you and talk to you about what we've been working on and what we've sort of unraveled here.
Okay, so the first session. Thank you for, there's some great things happening. There's even a whole page across the hall. So to me, I probably would have went to the page, but I appreciate you coming to see us. So let's do this. Let's begin of where we're going together. And I think if you signed up online, right, probably, this was the description that you saw. And to me, as someone that develops menu items and different products for people in the industry, my main objective is deliver on expectations. Isn't that what we try to do? There's no best. There's what people are coming for. And so what I've done is gone through what was online and highlighted some of the key points that we want to make sure that we deliver on your expectations of why you took the time to come here today, right? And so we're going to start off with talking about speed to market, really important, how to create value, how we rely on each other to create value, and in these symbiotic relationships that we have with everyone in here in the room today. We're going to talk about how to critically think about sensory and about flavor. Now, not from a sensory analysis perspective, especially to this audience. I'm sure there's a handful of people that is their business in sensory science. What we're looking at today isn't necessarily about flavor, but we're going to let the perception, but more of the business of flavor and how we create flavorful experiences in a sustainable way.
Yeah, so starting from the very beginning, right, one of the things that in order to understand where we got here, we have to start from the very, very beginning, right? So understanding what that shift was that catalyzed us from going meat, fire, right, very fundamental rudimentary interaction in cooking, to how all of us are here today, right? It's a pretty impressive group that we have in a pretty massive and very complex industry with a lot of nuanced interactions that create some pretty incredible flavors that we get to deliver to our customers. That branches just beautifully into our second point here, which is, what are those interactions? It's more than just, I'm a chef, I make this fantastic food. At Campbell's, I made some great soups. I wasn't the arbiter of flavor. I wasn't the gatekeeper as to what went to our consumers, right? There's a lot of things that actually need to happen in order for our products to get from us to that end consumer, right? And then lastly, the critical analysis of flavor. How does flavor manifest, right? As a marketer, as a salesperson, we have plenty of people with different backgrounds here. You all, whether or not you think it, you all have some sort of direct or indirect impact on what your consumer experiences. And the flavor experiences that they have from your CPG and your QSR, any of your companies.
And it's gotten so much more varied, which we'll talk about today. It used to be a couple channels, now there's a lot more happening. So, brief background, just to put this in context. My beginning of codification of flavors started, as a lot of you know, for years at the RCA. I've always presented on the flavors, cuisines, cultures about Southeast Asia. Today, that's not what it's about, whatsoever. Because I've realized a lot of the ways that I learned to codify flavor relate to any cuisine, right? So, and over the years as a consultant working with a lot of you, honored a lot of people that were clients and partners and friends. And then for the last 6 years, been building a company called Flavor 360. So that's my focus now. Chase?
Yeah, and so graduate of the CIA, baking and pastry, I fell in love with the formulaic nature of what goes into actually creating a product, right? It's a lot more than just, I'm going to saute this or I'm going to bake this, and maybe I'll just dial up one ingredient, right? That's where I fell in love with just the science that goes into creating a product. When I graduated from culinary science, I have some great colleagues in the back here from Campbell's Soup, and I worked with their innovation team there, and that's kind of where I fell in love with the consumer insights, understanding it's not about me, right? It's about who the end consumer was. I remember one of the most eye-opening experiences was I had to create a product for Maria. Maria was not one person. Maria was a group of people. She represented an entire segment, right? And it was this mental shift that it's not about making a great product. We've all made a fantastic product that flopped, right? It's about understanding how we deliver it. And that's really the codification that we've dived into with Flavor 360.
So Flavor 360 is a consulting and software company. Come to the booth, 605, if you want to learn more. Today is about what we're getting into, codification of flavor. So where did it start? For me, I think it began 20-something years ago when I was teaching at the culinary and I had to describe, had to codify a cuisine in order for people to replicate that. Just like we do whether you run operations for food service, or you're developing products for a plant floor, you need to codify something, put it into a formulaic approach, so you could actually transfer that knowledge. Then, 20 years later, yes, that long, last year, a couple of years ago, I was working with the folks up at UC Davis, and I realized some of the things that we do every day, like sitting down at your computer into the Google search engine. How many people use Google search for their R&D occasionally? Did you realize there's 3 global standards for the codification of a recipe? 3. And without taking recipes that are posted online, like you do just naturally, and those actually going through that and breaking it into different data sets, it wouldn't work. It's what a lot of you do just inherently when you're developing something. So that was the next step. Then
last year we kind of built on that, right? The previous year we looked at how does a flavor experience manifest? What are those key contributing factors and attributes just to deliver flavor? And then we started to think a bit deeper, right? We started to look at, we have a very big industry and a lot of people with very different backgrounds. How you perceive flavor is incredibly different from how I perceive flavor. And that's not even on the basis of just sensory input. It's on a basis of your background. That's on a basis of your experiences. That's on a basis of your just body and breadth of knowledge. Those different unique lenses that we look at food through allow us to perceive food very differently and interact in a really nuanced and cohesive way that allows us to layer those flavors and those different inputs into creating a really incredible final product.
So, who knows who this is? Right? Raise your hand. Come on, participate. Right? So, curate. This was a realization I had, I guess it was last year. Right? We were working on a presentation. We'll elaborate a little bit more later. And I was thinking about, well, how did food get commercialized? How did a restaurant even become invented? Because in the 1600s, there weren't restaurants like we know today. No such thing. Think about that for a moment. How long we've been around. And curate was the first person not to create a system, but to codify something that was happening. And this is the first speed scratch system. Take this sauce, add this ingredient, it becomes that, it gets used for that. You take this, you add that, it turns it, and codify, right? I mean, when you think of it, I was like, oh, wow. These were the first R&D chefs. Right? Like, oh my goodness. So curate did the sauces, but then more importantly, I think all of us in this room owe our livelihoods. Now these are the heroes, there's other people involved, right? We know how that goes. But these folks, especially Escoffier, what Escoffier did, he codified the brigade system in a kitchen. Now why does that matter? And today we're going to have some discussion, right? I mean, look at the knowledge we have in this room. So why would that matter? What, for somebody that knows exactly about the brigade system and the entrepreneur and Poissonnier and all these things, why does that matter? How does it relate to what you do now? What do you think? Say that again?
Organization and efficiency.
Yes, organization and efficiency. And Chris, why, like, what about that? What enabled food to scale because of that organization?
You reduced overlap. You increased a better final product. You specialized.
You specialize. Really good. Thank you. That sounds like to the audience, Chris. Thank you. So he specialized in something. So what he did is he said, there's different stations on the line. They each do their own specialty, that's their core competency. Then they come together. It used to be you cooked food and you served it. Well, now you can have a menu. Now you can start to scale that. So that was the first restaurants. Well, first we get to restaurants, then we get from restaurants to commercialization, then we get to chain. You see where it laddered up to here today. So I think this is the first part of taking something and codifying. Now, another realization that came up and this was a couple years ago as well, is everybody in this room, and challenge us. I want to hear it. Because a lot of this is a work in progress. Notice in the top right, disclaimer, caveat, work in progress. But sincerely, everybody grows, makes, buys, or sells one of these components. Tell me another way to look at it, because this is just, remember, today, we're not saying this is what is. We're saying this is one way to look at it and understand it, and then understand how to break down flavor and work with each other. What do you think? What are some other ways to codify how the building blocks of flavor? How do we create food? Are there some nuances we're missing here? Each one can fraction off into a bunch of different subcomponents. But isn't this what we do? And as ingredients get transformed into components, which get assembled into builds, it can be a menu item, it can be a consumer product good, more value is created. And it gets more complex. The creation of flavor gets more complex often, and the evaluation can get more complex, because as you move down the line in the chain, what's going to happen is more people get involved. You're not just working with an internal team or working with an external team.
Absolutely. If you slide over here to our next one, you touched on this just a bit, and if you want to go ahead and click one more time, as Robert was saying, the same rules apply. Savory or sweet, CPG, QSR, the same rules apply, right? You always have to start with an ingredient to make a component, to make a building, right? So, here's where things start to get a little bit more complex, right? As chefs, we like to think that we're at the top of all hierarchies.
Not egocentric at all.
We like to think that. I'm sure there are people who don't, and that's good. There are a few of us. But that said, every single interaction, from the start of just sourcing an ingredient and utilizing that ingredient and component, and utilizing that component in a finalized product, there's always different key stakeholders and key decision makers that will fall higher or lower on that chain, right? Robert, you're going to talk a bit more about what that sort of means.
Yeah, of course. So think at the beginning. We're developing a Tex-Mex Cobb salad, right? Let's just make this up for something. So if I'm an R&D chef or an R&D team, and I know I want to make a salsa, I have to pick a tomato first. Pretty simple decision. And if I'm a chef and I'm saying, well, I want a round tomato, we'll get into the details, I want this, well then.
We have plenty more.
Yeah. So at the beginning, it's more of a business equation. It's pretty simple. What I need, someone tells me I need something, I can go out and get it. Then we move into compliance. Things get a little bit more complicated. And do I just check that off? Is it the right audit? What have you? Then culinary comes in, because it needs to meet what we need. Then we have operations. We move up into culinary. Now, when we build actually a component, well, now it's a complex flavor equation. The chef may lead. Isn't the arbiter of everything, but they start to lead. Then operations need to make sure we can do it. Then we get into compliance and business equation. Now, when we move into builds, marketing comes in a really strong way. Why is that? Why wasn't marketing considered before that? Oh, there's something in marketing here. What do you think? Thank you. Yes.
There was nothing super valuable to sell in a component beforehand.
Right. Unless you sell components, I suppose. But talking about if we're selling a build, I didn't think about that. Okay, see, that's what we're going to fix next time. That's good. Yes.
We want this to be a discussion just as much as it is a presentation.
So, but the marketing point, you're right. If it's being sold, now we need to think about, does it fit our brand? Does it match who we are? And for some companies, their brand is all sorts of flavors. Let's say Cheesecake Factory. There's some that are more honed in. Let's say Buffalo Wild Wings. Right? Core brand. So we're going to get into more details in each one. So let's say we have 5 different people. They all have a different role. They all have a different perspective. They all have a different reason to contribute and rely on each other. So it starts with an internal team, whether it be evaluating, creating, sourcing, at each step going along the process. Anything else?
No,
Okay.
absolutely not.
So where does it begin? Let's dive a little bit deeper into the flow of flavor. So we talked about, do you grow it? Do you harvest it? So it starts off with an ingredient. Pretty much everything. Am I missing something? Is there something before this? Okay. Then ingredients get processed. Now, look around you. Look at yourself. There are experts in that domain, in that market segment, that enable us to feed the world. We cannot feed 7, 8 billion people with all locally processed food. It's just not a reality. That's my perspective. I'm not saying we shouldn't do local, but we need to have scale to feed those folks, and that's what processors do. After you get that, well, now it needs to get distributed. And you have some folks, like you see, that are consumer CPG goods and B2B suppliers. And on the bottom side, right, you have consumer product goods, but not all of them. Like if you were saying Campbell's, right? With carrots, did you get someone to cut your carrots? You cut them in-house.
Cut them in-house.
Right, so it went straight past the processor. But I'm guessing you didn't make, what are some things that you sourced out? Hopefully.
Well, it's hard to say, but one interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is, you know, Campbell's made their noodles for the chicken noodle soup, right? There's these really underutilized or underestimated parts of what we as companies do. And I think we had an interaction in the back there talking about marketing of your components, right? How many people here knew that Campbell's made their noodles for chicken noodle soup, aside from my Campbell's team? Right? Why isn't that marketed? Anybody? Does a red and white consumer necessarily think, I really love handmade, fresh pasta in my soup? Maybe not, right? It's all about understanding what your interactions are and who your key consumers are.
So then, typically, remember back in the day, right? We've got 2 different age groups here, right? The OG, the older folks, and think about it though, folks that have been doing this for 20, 30 years. Back in the day, there was food service and there was retail. What about now? What about just in the last 2 years of what's changed with the great accelerator, aka COVID? Really, has it changed to more of an omnichannel model? There's not food service necessarily that just does food service. And even if you're just food service, you're selling products in the marketplace, you got a ghost kitchen here. It's blended. Consumers, customers, experience flavor, what you create within the ecosystem in all sorts of areas. So that's one side.
Yeah, and so here we're going to go through, like we've been talking about, we want to keep driving this home, how something starts and how it gets to that end consumer. We're going to talk about the 2 primary channels from which classically we think of ingredient all the way to a consumer, and some of the sort of, I suppose, nuances that can go into that equation as well. So we start off all of our great sponsors here. Thank you all for sponsoring, of course. But we have all these great ingredient suppliers, all of these great growers, right? And from there, we move into one of 2 channels, right? We go into either a CPG setting, right? You have your Campbell's, Kraft, Corn. From those CPGs, you move into a retailer, right? Oftentimes, CPGs don't sell directly to their consumers. It's a growing category. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then from this bottom side, right? You go from your suppliers, your growers, directly to QSR, right? We have Dave Woolley of Buffalo Wild Wings in the We have, you know, these great interactions that go from CPG all the way to retail, and then, Robert, there we go, beautiful. We have CPG into QSR, right? Impossible sells the Impossible Whopper, right? Burger King sells the Impossible Whopper, but they couldn't do that without Impossible. Next, one more. And we also have these sort of hybridization sorts of moments where I go into a Wawa, I'm from New Jersey. I go in most of the time utilizing it as a quick service restaurant. I don't even think about the gas. I don't even think about, you know, picking up a snack. I go because I want a cheesesteak, right? It's just that simple interaction. But you also have the ability to pick up a packaged good, right? We have these really diverse and growing interactions where also we have this nice curved arrow here. We have a growing segment where CPGs are selling directly to consumers. You can buy on a website. It's growing because of what? Pandemic, right? We didn't want to go to the grocery store. There's supply chain issues. You can sell it straight to the people that you know and find more success.
So, we're sorry if your brand isn't represented here. The slide is already freaking crowded. And if you've been to any of my presentations, you know I tend to saturate things with lots of visuals, and that's just how it is. So what do you think? Hey, what are you thinking about this? Is this a plausible model? Is there anyone here that fits somewhere outside of this that we haven't thought of? I'd love to hear your opinions. Come on, Samir, I see that skeptical look on your eyes. You're an academic, you're thinking. Private label? Okay. Private label goes directly up to...
The top one I see more is the branded products.
Ooh.
But I don't see like private label that would feed into the retail.
Okay, I like that. There's a place in there. How would we position that in there? What do you think?
Since that kind of I see that kind of going.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you know, when we worked together at Two Chefs on a Roll 20 years ago, when I first got into R&D, I was having a conversation with some folks this morning, and they were saying, I'll leave it anonymous because I don't know if I should say this, was that it was, you know, over 40% of their sales in a retailer are their private label. Back then, that wasn't the percentage. I remember going to the PMA show, the Private Label Manufacturers Association, going, what the? Are you kidding me? You don't make? Because I was naive. I didn't know. Just didn't know. So it's a good point about private label. Thank you. I saw someone over here. Yes.
So I work in the cannabis industry developing chemicals, so it's a very different kind of workflow. But for us, I would say, we kind of cover, all of that in one because we have to be vertically integrated. So we also, purchase ingredients from others and then assemble those components and builds. But I would say we stretch across all of those.
Everyone hear that? Something interesting, if I may say, but I think is interesting about the cannabis industry, you help everyone else, because we get hungry. I'm just saying, I've heard such things. So yeah, that's a really good point, right? I mean, that's awesome. I never thought of it. So that's the cannabis and how they help all of us. Symbiotic industry. I love it.
E-commerce.
What's that?
E-commerce. Missing from third party, Amazon, Letterboxd.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you have people that have popped up.
Yeah, we need to have that, because they weren't, is anyone here from any of those companies? Why is that? No, seriously, we went through the website, we wanted to make sure we represent who was in the audience. Why isn't Amazon R&D here? Wow, that's an awkward silence.
We didn't have order out Prime.
Well, Whole Foods would be.
Because Whole Foods, true, but they weren't doing the R&D before they bought them. But that's a really good point. I like that. That's a great note to self.
Third party between manufacturer and consumer.
Love it. You're right, and that's why that's what we were talking about the Obenchain, where it's coming from everywhere. And they have their own private label. When you buy something on Amazon, for instance, do you buy the Amazon? It says Amazon. Oh goodness, they'll take it back right now. Just get that.
Where's the food service distribution?
Food service distribution. Distribution isn't bottling.
Time to click onto that next.
Oh, okay. Well, there you are. Now, welcome to Robert's brain. And I'm not kidding you. This I developed.
The audience either.
What's that?
We didn't plan him in the audience for that fantastic segment.
Had to have got the tension going. So no joke though, some years ago, and this is the cleaned up version, I've been mind mapping the industry to understand where, personally, from Flavor 360, we fit in the middle and can help connect everyone. That was my purpose. And so I get in here, spend hours figuring out, and at the top, which we didn't talk about, is the educational organizations that support everyone, that feed the industry. Then we move over from there, and we have the professional education, and we have the commodity boards. Without commodity boards that support a lot of what we all do financially, with knowledge, how would we all survive? Right? We rely on the farmers. We rely on the people that tell us about it. We learn about it. It helps fund the RCA and why we're here today. We move over to professional associations. Oh, like the RCA. How many people in this room do you do business with? If we didn't have professional associations, the business of flavor wouldn't be the same, would it? This is why we need connections. That's why everyone's so happy to be here together. And then the marketing agencies, the think tanks, and so on. The bottom half are what we talked about. So yes, some great points. But it's a complex equation. We start with people, we move into different parts of the industry, but we are all together in this. Can you see anything on that one? Let's get into the ingredients again.
Yes. So, in order to make a great recipe, you need to, one, have great ingredients. But you also need to stop and think about what you're utilizing. You know, why are you using that tomato for that salsa, right? Why are you using that tomato for that salsa on top of that nacho, right? There's a lot of interactions that go into just, one, understanding what products you're using, but justifying it and operationalizing it. Implementation is a huge step, and something that we, as chefs, once again, don't always consider is the fact that we're not the gatekeepers to flavor, right? Every single person within our industry, within our company, helps deliver that final product to our consumers. And the more that we can start to codify and really critically think about what those interactions are, the better we can speed up those interactions, make better products for ourselves, for our consumers, and deliver them faster in a more rapid fashion.
Speaking of rapid and speed, reality check on time? Perfect. Okay, we're good. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper. That's why Chase cut me off earlier. It's like, dude, we're going to talk about this. Don't go too far. So the ingredient side of it, remember we talked about the business equation, this model is that whole model. So let's talk a little bit. We start at the beginning, business equation. What are we missing? I mean, supplier relationships. Who do you do business with? Who are your partners? Who have you relied upon when you come on the last couple of years? Hasn't this been stressed? From distribution to short, I don't even say the words. Half of you in the room, it's like that's my daily existence, is finding solutions for not having what we have. It's a tough time, so your suppliers are really important. That's the business equation. Compliance, allergens, food safety, third-party audit. What else? Let's look at compliance. In your business, in these different groupings, what do you look for? What are some things we're missing? We couldn't put it all on here. Right? What are the things that you need to check off the box, or spend some time analyzing, or evaluating, communicate, have partners internally and externally? What do you think? Sustainability, yes. So sustainability would be probably as in business ethos. Maybe there's a whole thing about who we are as a brand, who we represent. Well, how would we categorize, where would sustainability be? What would be the next one? Is just being responsible? But sustainability, to me, that word can mean a lot of things. One, I'm guessing you're intending about sustainability for the planet and what we do. Absolutely. What about sustainability of business? Needs to be both. And the only sustainable business is one that's profitable. And that's why that symbiotic relationship and how we rely on each other. Because if we don't all get something from it, none of us are going to survive as an industry. And that's what's been happening the last couple of years, is figuring out, hey, I need you in this. Help me. I covered you for the last 15 years. Or, I don't have this, how can we make it better? So sustainability, it's a good point. Maybe there's somewhere to fit in there. What else is there? What else are we missing?
Certifications.
Certifications, right, so into compliance, and how did you, which,
Like vegan, non-GMO.
Oh.
Sure.
yeah, that's a good point, so product claims, something like that? Yeah, so that would be, it falls into a couple things, right? It's part of the business equation, but it's also about compliance, because if you claim it's non-GMO, which may be part of your ethos and who you believe you are and what you do, but you need to make sure that you actually get it from the suppliers and it's checked off, and which one of the certifications are you going to use? That's one of your partners. So people that help you from beginning to end. Okay, keep going. We have time for more discussion. Anything change to build on?
I'm all good.
Okay.
Yeah, be excited about it.
Okay. Fruits are not vegetables. So what? You're like, really, Robert? I came here to listen to you tell me something obvious. What's the difference between a fruit and a vegetable? Botanically, seeds. Take a look. Why does this matter? You're a chef, you're a home cook, you're a product developer. Why care? Yes?
Servings on the nutrition label?
Oh, servings on nutrition label, that's interesting. Yes?
The processing of it?
The processing of it. How do I transform this ingredient into something that I can serve if I'm not serving it directly? So let's talk about avocado. Do you take the seed out of an avocado before it gets into a component? Pretty much always. And welcome to the world of uncertainty, right? This is culinary arts, right? It's not all going to be the same. But an avocado always comes out. Mango, does the seed come out? Think of the new market forms of mangoes in the last couple of years of quality of avocados. Remember HPP 20 years ago when that first came out, 25 years ago? It was like, oh my goodness. You can process something. Now that's just so much less expensive. It's everywhere where it used to be a food product. I remember when, it was 20 years ago when shrimp came to me, HPP raw, it'll sit 60 days. I'm not taking it. I'm out. Like, no, thank you. Now it's like, well, yeah, that's how it works. So processing, and the equipment suppliers we didn't have in there, that's who it is. The equipment suppliers that are in there. Don't change the product, change the process. So we always take the seed out of a mango. Now melon, always out of a cantaloupe? Yes. Seeds out of a watermelon. Ooh, hold on, now you gotta make a decision. Oh no. Do you take the seeds out of a watermelon before you make a feta watermelon salad? Come on, there's some chefs in here, at least 30% of you. No. Or you buy a, is it seedless? No. So now you had to, do you see what recipes are algorithms. Algorithm, tree structure, decisions. You make this, it gets to this point, now you need to make a decision. Which way do I go?
RCA.
No. So watermelon, seeds out maybe. Cucumber. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depends on what type of cucumber you buy, isn't it? Oh. Now you see where we're going. And these are things that come on, this is like the leading people in the industry. Not just in the industry, but in your companies. That's why you're here. So a lot of this may seem like, oh yeah. Think about it for a second. Inherently you think of this, but there's more, and it gets more complex. You'll see. So, tomatoes. Well, do I want a round tomato, a 5x6? Do I want a Roma, a cherry, a grape? Depends on what I'm making, doesn't it? From moisture to shape to purchase, the tomato, squash, etc.
So, back to flavor. Fruits aren't vegetables. We've certainly talked through that. But, just like Robert was saying, we want to talk about the justification of why we utilize this particular. We'll stay with tomatoes and save that specific fruit. Like I talked about at the very beginning, we all look at flavor differently. We all look at why we might use a tomato differently. If you're in compliance, if you're in the business equation, you might not necessarily care exactly about the fact that this is the sweetest or this is the most umami tomato I've ever had in my life. You want consistent supply chain, right? You want reliability of delivery. You want it to not be the most expensive tomato that you've ever bought. Whether or not it makes the most fantastic salsa you've ever had, it doesn't matter, right? You need something that's functional and operational, right? And that small way of thinking is still impacting flavor, right? If something's acidic, well, it's going to affect its shelf life, right? It might have a longer shelf life if it's under a specific pH. It might have a shorter shelf life if it's above a specific pH, right? Inherently, you'll pick up on that acidity, right? We always think of our food scientists or our broader supply chain team as, food scientists and supply chain company, but we don't always think of them as having a direct impact on the flavor of our products. And that's an obsolete way of thinking, right? We need to be better about our interactions and, our pride as chefs and being able to collaborate and understand where each of us comes from in order to deliver a product that is incredible in flavor, but also well thought through in the justification of that flavor for our consumers. So, we talked about ingredients. Let's toss some more thought process together, right? And let's talk about components, right? As Robert started to allude to earlier, we'll talk about...
Too early, apparently.
I appreciate the excitement, but sometimes that's my talking point. So we're gonna layer these flavors together. We're gonna talk about components a little bit deeper and the thought processes that go into why we make our components.
Back to the component. So now we're making a salsa. That's a complex flavor equation, isn't it? There's a lot of different decisions that need to be made, from which ingredient to how it's mixed to with the moisture content. There's so much more to it. Operation, shelf life, compliance. Oh, HACCP plan. Well, are you making it? Is the fruit washed before it comes in? What if someone drops it on the walk-in floor? How do we stir? Just saying. That's never happened to anyone that's worked in a restaurant. Did you sanitize it? Mm-hmm. Thought so. So what else are we missing here? What are some things that you need to consider in this situation? Anyone? Anyone?
Cost.
Cost. Yes. Oh, well, that would be, yes. Business equation. Cost and parameters. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. It's a great point. I mean, come on. We need to make money. Right?
Storage.
Storage, absolutely. Now you're like, oh, do we have a container? Yes. Labor, packaging. Notice how easy it is for now to start saying, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Oh no, now we gotta, do we train people? Do we use something to chop? And it just goes on. Which ingredient, how to prep it, into what form? So we start off with the fruit. Now we need to consider what we do with that fruit. Tomatoes. If I'm making a salsa that is dry, that is for chips, as opposed to a salsa that may be acting as the dressing, that would be a different decision. Makes sense, right? I see, like, oh yeah, I always do. Oh yeah, that's a good freaking point, right? Then we go down to seed in, small die seeds in. We might have de-seeded for pico de gallo, like really? Then we get to jalapenos. Do we de-seed them? Well, nowadays, probably not, right? What happened to jalapeno soul? They're just not spicy anymore. They used to have flavor. But now it's like, it's just so sad. And as we know, chilies on the same plant can be different, but they bred them for that. Just sacrilegious. Limes. Do we use juice? Do we use fresh? Tomato salsa, onions. I mean, you see where we're going with this as we go through it. Each step. Think about the decision that was made then. Who you worked with internally to make a decision on which product. When you look outward into the industry, who your co-packer was. It's all of these little things, and we all add value to this equation as we move down. And spices, probably more than salt, but maybe not just pico de gallo, right? So pico de gallo, no other spices, no cumin or anything, right? It's just pico de gallo. Maybe pepper, pimienta blanco, maybe. No salt. Okay.
So, Robert made a fantastic point earlier about the fact that recipes are algorithms, right? There's a necessary if-then that happens every time you use any given ingredient, any of your given components, in any of your given builds, right? So as Robert was talking about, we'll just stick with tomatoes. Tomatoes are a fantastic example to get the point across, right? If you're making a tomato salsa of some sort, why would you not use a grape tomato or a cherry tomato? Anybody? takes time, right? Who wants to dice up a bunch of different cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes just to produce some pico de gallo, right? You're always going to use a round tomato. Something that we all do as chefs, right? You inherently think through this entire decision tree, naturally, split second. You go, I know exactly what I'm going to use for this, 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 and this, right? Just makes sense. Now I'm going to use a cherry tomato for a salsa. But why don't we stop and think about that for every single interaction that we have, right? Why don't we talk about the fact that jalapenos are starting to lose their flavor, they're losing their soul. Why aren't we using an interesting chili? Why aren't we using serrano or a habanero, right? There's different justifications, there's different markers, there's different reasons why you would or wouldn't. Anybody, any thoughts, feedback?
What are we missing? What are some other decisions that you would make? Who makes salsa? Who has salsa on their menu or in their manufacturing facility? Raise your hand, come on. So, what are some things that you consider as you're making a salsa? Do you make process everything? Do you bring some things in process, some things in-house? Whatever you can share if you can. I know this is sensitive in this room sometimes. Right? Okay. Fair. Yes?
So, Robert, just to clarify, we're looking at this from a manufacturing standpoint, or are we looking at this more from like a bench top?
Well, this one would be, it's the thought process of making a responsible gold standard on the bench,
Okay.
and then thinking through what would be the next step to do that. Great point, right? I mean, obviously different decisions.
So heat consistency, like front burn, middle burn, after burn?
Oh, now we're getting complex, right? It's not just about the soul lacking jalapenos, but it's actually about what type of heat. And may I say, you know what? I want those jalapenos for visual identity, because if it's a pico de gallo, it's probably serranos actually more than jalapenos, I think. But right, it should be serranos. Yeah, lo siento. So it should be that, but it was a miss from a culinary perspective. However, what type of heat? Because you may say, you know what, they don't have that soul, because now when we commercialize it, we're going to add some type of something from a flavor, from a heat, from a spice, to add that layer to hit it right where it needs to be at the right level of consistency. So actually the soulless jalapeno is a good thing, because it's consistent, but then we can add the heat deliberately with something that was from one of our ingredient suppliers. That's a great point.
On to your previous slide.
Did you know that I'm much older than him? And I realized
You
that
can't
when
tell
we
because the mustache, of course.
yeah, a couple days ago, I'm like, I realized in this presentation that, okay, I've been doing this for 36 years, right? He's never used a cherry tomato.
Well, I've used the cherry tomato. That's not.
Well, okay, wait a second. In commercial environments.
This is true. Yeah.
Think about this, folks. I know this sounds trivial, but when a lot of us got in this business, or 20 years ago, there was no grape tomato. It was in the 90s. Would you make, right? I mean, oh my goodness. And now, you go to the market, there's cherry tomatoes, but not so much. And if I was going to make a salsa, I wouldn't make it with a cherry tomato. I agree with you. It would implode. It would be. Would I make one with grape tomatoes, like sliced in half? You could. It would hold together. I don't know if I call it a salsa. It could be. Big difference. So I just thought that was hysterical. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, we just had this conversation. Like, oh my goodness, they're in such different worlds. Go ahead.
So, as we start to think not just about ingredients, but we start to think broadly about components, it's less about picking out each of those teeny factors inside of it, but more so thinking about it as a system, right? It's about operations, it's about implementations, it's about those interactions of those ingredients as a whole to make something cohesive and delicious, right? It's one of those things where the operational feasibility is sometimes first and foremost before flavor, right?
Yeah, what about temperature with that, right? For those of you that have salsa on a menu, do you need to keep it refrigerated? Well, of course you do, right? So when you develop the formula and you do a cutting, did you set them all out in little cups and they sit out at room temperature for a while when you're doing the 4 different versions and the third version is warmer than the first version? It's irresponsible. It really is. It's a completely different flavor profile because of its temperature. How often, I mean, come on, we've all been cuttings and tastings in the middle of who knows where. And you're like in the back of some room and you're putting stuff on trays, like, well, I don't know, refrigeration, I'm just happy I have a sheet pan. Oh, we need cardboard wrapped with foil. Those little differences, from being a chef, control freak, control everything you can, because there's so many things you can't control. Even if it's in concept, do what you can when you can. So I think temperature is actually a really important point to make.
All right, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Builds, right? We've talked about ingredients, we've talked about components. Now, how do they come together and how do they manifest for our consumers? What are the things that we, as professionals, think about? Or what are the things that we need to start talking about in a more open, collaborative manner with our team members, right? Delivering a product. It always sounds simple once you get that first project brief, right? Oh, I got this, yeah. A couple things, it'll be perfect. 20 iterations later, you're still in the plant, right? Trying to figure out how the heck to get through it. Let's talk about that. So, this was a bit of a fun research project that I did in collaboration with the International Corporate Chefs Association a few months back. We were looking at all of our sponsors and where each of those sponsors fit into each of the key members of the International Corporate Chefs Association. So, I decided, well, let's look at all of those menus, and let's start to codify and understand what the differences are, what the big buckets are, and if there's any large areas of overlap, right? I looked at every single one of these menus, I quantified all of the menu items, the different menu categories. It was quite a long time sitting in front of my computer, and I was very hungry by then. Thankfully, Cheesecake Factory provided me a good couple hours to just sit there and look through the entire menu. I think we found about 1,200 menu items. That felt like about 800 of them. I'm sorry if there's anyone from Cheesecake Factory.
Oh no, I'm going to tell Bob.
I love Cheesecake Factory. But so that said, there were about 1,200 menu items, broadly speaking. There were roughly 5 categories, right? You have your appetizer, mains, desserts, beverages, so. Of those 1,200 menu items, there were only about 30 bills. 1,200 menu items, 30 bills. It's a very, very powerful number, at least to me, right? Huge industry, all of these different products, all of these different menu items come together in less than 50 ways, right? It's a very potent way to think about the fact that it's a complex industry. We do a really good job of simplifying everything as much as we possibly can, delivering it in the fastest way possible.
Yeah, and that's something about the ingredient, component, and build, where at the beginning I was saying, does it get more complex as you move through this, right? It does in some ways, but it can actually be simpler when you get to the end. Because then you're not cooking, you're a finishing dish, right?
So, we've talked about tomato, we've talked about salsa, let's talk about it in the context of a salad. Why not, right? We talked about the fact that in order to make a recipe, you have that decision tree. You have all of those interactions of, why did I use this specific product or this specific component? And what were the justifications behind it? Well, when you look at a salad, that's a bit daunting just looking at it on paper like that. You start to go, wow, we have a pretty good job. Maybe I didn't give us enough credit where, we should put ourselves a little bit higher on the hierarchy every now and then. But when you start to look at each of these different boxes and squares, that decision tree still comes together where every single component and every single ingredient has to be justified every single step of the way by multiple different people, by multiple different stakeholders that are much broader than just chefs, and every single person contributes to delivering that final flavor.
It's the flavor gate system. It's not about that. We have the stage gate system. There's all these different flavor gates that have to open and close. And to open that door, it needs to make sense from a business perspective, not just from a flavor perspective. Hence the flavor business. And of course, this is a really simplified version. It really is, because it was getting a little intense. Okay, so now we get here, marketing fits in the middle. What's the value proposition? Does it fit our brand? What about implementation? Implementation meaning, are we gonna run this with an LTO? That could be the entire system. Some people's entire worlds are looking at what are LTOs. So marketing needs to say, hey, if you're gonna put this on the permanent menu, how do we branch off from it? How do we do an LTO to feed into it? How do we, right? I mean, this is all something that we do naturally. Food costs, menu mix, it just gets a little bit more complicated. But however, if you think about it from an operation perspective, I remember a colleague of mine, Dan Kish. Dan Kish, we used to teach together at the culinary, and he was a Panera for about 13 years, right? Senior VP there. Works for a company called Food Fix and Revelry now. I remember Dan saying to me, and it was like 8 years ago or something, when he was still at Panera, and he says, you know, Robert, we don't cook, so to speak, although there's an application of heat, there's a transformation of flavors, and yes, they bake bread, yeah. But on the line, what he said I thought was brilliant. He called it a finishing kitchen. I'm like, yeah. That's all it is. How do I assemble these, take ingredients, conform, and most of it was, let's get components and put them together. And I remember when he came out with the sliced chicken, that was sous vide, that had chicken, salt, and pepper, nothing else. Shelf life, everything. Pre-sliced, ready to go. Before that, it was always pumped, it had this and that. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes we need that for the business equation. But in that case, they were able to afford that at scale. And so I think when you look at a build, it can be much more complex in the considerations for marketing, brand fit, and operations in some ways. But if it was a responsible gold standard, going back to Samir's point, if this is something on the bench or there, well, it shouldn't be that difficult. Unless you're actually still doing a lot of cooking in the kitchen. Look at Chang's, look at Cheesecake, look at some people, that's their brand. Is no, we actually cook from scratch. You know how much more complicated it is to run those operations? Yeah, I mean, they do a good job of that.
So wrapping up, right? We talked about the fact that components, you view them as a system. Builds an even more complex system, right? It's a method of delivery for flavors, right? It's several different interactions all happening on one bite, right? And it's not just about you as a chef. That's the whole thing. And I don't mean to harp on that, but sincerely, right? When we create a build, how many of us have made something that was so fantastic and you're like, I can't wait for this to go on a menu or go into manufacturing, and it didn't go well, it didn't sell well? Anybody aside from me? Okay, glad I'm not alone.
Be honest.
Right? We've all done it. It's not about making a great tasting product. It's about delivering that product. It's about delivering that flavor. Your marketing person is just as important to delivering flavor as you are, right? Having those interactions, those tight ties, and understanding where each of us overlaps and how we can support and understand each other and our roles, and have a more cohesive vocabulary from our roles and translating what something means to us to that next person in the chain. That's what catalyzes the delivery of flavor. It's not just I have a great product, this is going to sell fantastically, we're going to all be millionaires. I wish that was the case, right? It's a matter of delivering things to consumers in the best possible way, in the most cohesive way.
Yeah, and that's why I said about best at the beginning. It's not about the best salad. It's about the salad that's right for your customer. Oh, it's the best quality. You know. Really? It's appropriate. I remember, oh my goodness, I remember that project. Samir, I don't know if you were there at that point. Working on a national chain, and I had to come up with the first little apple crisp. They, oh wow, now I remember. We hand folded it. We put the big sugar on it, and I had like 90 cents to make this, right? It wasn't the best apple tart I could make, but you know what? It was appropriate quality, and that broke my heart. The first time, I just came from teaching at the CIA, and I'm like, well, that's good, but it was exactly, they were frozen apples, they weren't fresh, but they were fine. So, codifying Quantifying qualitative experiences helps us communicate more efficiently. It helps us be methodical about the decisions that we make. It helps us be more reasonable with your internal team, your external partners, and the entire industry that support each other. So be kind. Realize that we rely on each other to really succeed. It's symbiotic, not just synergistic. Anyone play Jenga? And everyone know what Jenga is, right? The pieces that stacked up. If you played Jenga before, these are the building blocks, the flavor. If you look at everything we've been talking about. And if you've played Jenga before, and even if it's a big one when you're drinking beers and doing all that stuff, wherever one of those bars they call them, or fun factories. So even if you're playing the big one, you're pulling it all out. Even if you pull out a middle one, does just everything above fall? A lot of the time the whole thing falls. So we need to work together in the business of flavor. This is what we do daily. This is why we're here at the RCA together, to help each other, learn from each other.
And what better medium to use than food? It's a natural sharing experience, right? Robert said something just a few minutes ago about we need to be better about teaching. We need to be better about teaching, but we need to be better about sharing in our food and sharing in our experiences and sharing in our knowledge, right? That's what food's all about. And the more that we can do that, not just as cooks and as chefs, but as an industry, as people within an organization, to understand each other better. You'll bridge those gaps, right? You'll speak a cohesive language. You'll make better products.
So, if you want, this is just one way we talk about food. Some of the things we've referenced earlier, some other presentations that we've done, that are posted on. We just launched a new website last week. If you've ever done that, you know how much work that takes. So that's exciting. They're posted on there. YouTube, we have some videos, including the one we're filming today. We'll put the camera there. So, please, come join us. Come taste some really lovely chili crisp at the booth, and we'll talk about how to evaluate a component and learn more about what we're doing. And I'm honored, appreciative, and Chase, well done, my friend. Thank you. I hope to see some of you. I will today. I will tomorrow. Come by and see us. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, we're not running away. If you have any last minute questions before you leave, you can leave. Don't feel awkward. Anyone else? Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you soon.